Hi, I'm Kemp. I'm Professor Emerita, University of Southern California. I'm retired now, just a few months, but 15 years ago, I moved away from the mainland and moved to Hawaii. On that move, I decided it was time to go all digital paper-wise. So I jettisoned almost my entire library. Therefore, I'm not showing you my library. But what I did do was save a few key memorable documents that were part of my career path. So I'm going to show you the most important book, and then I may show you a few other things. So this is the book that got me started in GI science. It's not reversed. Principles of Geographical Information Systems for Land Resources Assessment by Peter Burrow. It was published in 1986. And at that time, we didn't have a lot of web things or digital searching engines. And I believe I must have found this book somewhat randomly on the geography section that I used to visit when I was down at University of Victoria, where I had done my master's. Found this book and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. So I bought it and put it in my gym bag. And every time I sat on the bike at the gym, I read this book. So I can tell you that I literally sweated over this book. I read every single word of it before I started in GI science, and then went from this book to start my PhD at Santa Barbara with my good child in 1988. So this was a pretty fundamental book for me. Now there's been some newer editions. There's the one done in 1998, so 12 years after the first book, with Rachel McDonnell from Oxford. And then another one done just recently. There's a 2015 version where they added yet another author, Christopher Lloyd. These are all really good examples of GI science. I think that's why it excited me so much to come across this book so early in my career. And it really pointed me towards the fundamentals of the science rather than the technology that we use. So before Peter Burrow's book, I did take some related coursework, and in particular the course on computer cartography that I took at the University of Calgary in 1970. It was taught, incidentally, by Nigel Waters, who was Mike Goodchild's second PhD. I didn't know Mike Goodchild at the time, but I started in my GI science career with his, actually Nigel wasn't even graduated with his PhD by the time he was teaching us this class. So in 1970, we weren't talking about geographical information science yet. Roger Tomlinson hadn't made that name up yet. So we had computer manuals. This is the textbook that I used for my introductory computer cartography class. And basically it is photocopies of the manuals of all the technology we used. So kind of like how we are now, where we don't like people to teach the technology. Well, that's all we could learn. When I look inside this manual, though, there is a lot of science in here, buried, like how to digitize a polygon by going around in the clockwise direction, and how you dealt with unclosed polygons and polygons that had islands, and all this other stuff about structuring data. So there was an awful lot of data structuring. Some of the interesting things in this book, in my notes, which I did keep, brought with me to Hawaii, are my notes for punching out punch cards. So all of the programs that were done in this class were done on punch cards, and I carried the big box of punch cards down to the big computer facility, and we put our cards in, and it took forever before them to come out. And if you screwed up, you didn't get very much error information. So I started with computer cartography, and so Peter Burrow's book made sense to me and was the next step forward. We're talking, it was 16 years after I learned it in 1970. So then I went to Santa Barbara, and I can show you the next book on my list. Now this one's mine, but it's pretty important. This is the NCGIA Core Curriculum in GIS. We published this in 1990, so not long after Peterborough did his book. And this was a set of lecture notes that I worked with Mike Goodchild at the National Center for Geographic Information and Analysis to produce. And that was because we had only Peter's textbook to teach GIS from. The field was beginning to emerge as an academic activity, but we hadn't, all of us who needed to teach had nothing but Peter's book, basically, if you happen to have found it. Otherwise, what were they teaching? They were teaching the technology. So the intention was to create some foundational materials where we could teach this thing, which quickly became the GI science, the foundations, the theory. So the 75 weekly lecture notes in the 3 volumes of the NCGI Core Curriculum, they started as my notes as Mike's PhD TA, my notes of his lectures, and then they quickly evolved and improved and we got other contributions. So I have the NCGI Core Curriculum, and I also brought with me to Hawaii the other variations. So here it is in Japanese. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is my Japanese version. I have the Hungarian version, and I have the French version. So, which is pretty neat to see your book translated into all those different versions. So those are my memorable books on my virtual bookshelf. These are not virtual books, these are real books. But they were the ones that were worth saving from my career. Everything else, it's online. And I've got lots of cool stuff, but I'm not showing you my online stuff. So thank you for listening. I hope you found it exciting. There are lots of stories about the old days, of course. So enjoy the technology you have today and enjoy learning all the new stuff that's just around the corner. Aloha.